But first, we're all familiar, aren't we, with the adolescent who borrows the family car, returns it with nothing much left in the tank, expecting mum and dad to just fill it up. But adults too can sometimes get away with being all care and no responsibility, especially if they're state premiers. Take Annastacia Palaszczuk, Premier of Queensland, or Anastasi as she's sometimes dubbed, whose trigger-happy border closures have seen dying people out of Queensland hospitals and ruined her tourism industry. Yet who's now demanding, isn't she, financial assistance from the Commonwealth to help the people she's harmed? Or as New South Wales Treasurer Dom Perrottet put it, Queensland closed one day, asking someone else to pick up the tab the next. He also offered up some helpful information to the Premier.
Money doesn't grow on banana trees, and that's what the Queenslanders need to understand. And the federal government has allocated $130 billion to the JobKeeper program here in our state. We've had about $30 billion in stimulus measures. Now, that's not our money. It's not the Commonwealth's money. It's the taxpayers of our country's money.
Mind you, the Queensland Premier didn't knock back entry if you're an AFL footballer or Hollywood star or someone rich arriving on a millionaire's yacht. But now reality has hit, with their closures devastating the local tourism industry. Now, like so many, I thought about travelling interstate at Christmas. While I was reasonably confident Gladys Berejiklian would maintain some COVID common sense, I couldn't be sure Daniel Andrews would panic and leave me stranded away from home, which is exactly what happened to tens of thousands of Victorians forced to spend New Year's and beyond stuck interstate. So unfortunately, like me, my tourism dollars stayed at home. And it's premiers panicking at the first sign of a cluster that's made it virtually impossible for people to plan, be it a family holiday, a birthday get-together, or those poor brides and grooms, a wedding. Now, all of that also has hit hard our tourism and hospitality industry that employs up to 1 million people. It's struggling to keep going. So I'm full of sympathy for the businesses and the workers who've been smashed through no fault of their own, but I've got no sympathy for premiers who want to claim the political win for being tough, going into their elections and supposedly keeping people safe, but who refuse to accept the political pain of their stop-start economies. Gladys Berejiklian today was spot on.
Well, the whole point that New South Wales has been so strong in keeping borders open within Australia is to prevent exactly what the Queensland Premier is now complaining about. When you unnecessarily close state borders, you lose jobs, you create hardship, you impact people's mental health and well-being. There is no reason why certain premiers move too quickly in shutting out New South Wales. There is nowhere in the state that's a hotspot, and even if there was, why should people from other parts of the state be prevented from moving freely? Now, she is now the victim of a policy that she put in place herself.
Now, there are two problems here, aren't there? First, Scott Morrison should not have agreed to what amounted a blank cheque for premiers closing down their state's economies. I agree, his government, of course, did need to support workers and businesses when the government shut them down. But the government that shut them down should have been the government that paid, so that the politicians making the decisions would have to have taken budget responsibility and other considerations into their decision-making. So rather than just pay all the bills for the state's actions, the PM should have required a percentage-wise in terms of matching contribution from the premiers. So perhaps half of JobKeeper, let's say, being paid out of Canberra and the other half paid for by the states. In the end, money talks. Right now, you've got premiers using border closures to score political points, bearing no financial consequences at all. If you want change to border management, forget meaningless national cabinet meetings and instead start billing the premiers for the costs of their lockdowns rather than Scott Morrison or, I have to say, the federal taxpayer picking up the tab. Now, I promise you, that'll focus their attention faster than just another Canberra talk fest. The other problem too is that avoiding all risks to physical health unavoidably poses big risks to mental health, let alone massive risks to wealth. And at some point, government has to balance and accept a trade-off. This is where New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has been by far the best of the premiers, accepting that some COVID outbreaks are inevitable and staying on top of them through a crack contact tracing team and localised restrictions rather than statewide border closures is the way to go. Victorians particularly can't go through another year like the one they've just had. Maybe they're coming vaccines, maybe they will rid us of COVID altogether. But the message from the experts is that these restrictions are here for the foreseeable time, vaccine or not. Now, here in Victoria, the rumour in recent weeks has been that the Premier won't rule out a return to curfews and the 5-kilometre rule come winter. I'm in fact told some in the health department are even modelling this scenario. Now, 12 months on from the first outbreak, we have to find ways of living with this virus. Living with it in ways that doesn't let it get out of control, but also doesn't leave people vastly poorer or taxpayers even more massively in debt. Now, I know some states might feel smug, some more than others, but in the end, if the money comes from Canberra, let me tell you, we are all footing the bill.